Well, I'm here with Dr. Joe Melvin in Flat Time House, John Latham's home and studio and work of art in Peckham, and we're going to have a conversation about the exhibition Ants and Grasshoppers, which I've been very lucky to have the opportunity to curate, and we're going to have a general chat about the artists, the works, the house, Latham, and so on.
I think the show is absolutely remarkable and wonderful, but something I'd really like to talk about to start with is the renewed book,
Yes.
the restored book.
Yeah.
So from the fact that we have this here for the first exhibition since its restoration, conservation, is really remarkable, and being able to see what's on the spine. We were talking about invoice,
Yes.
unheard, and that palindromic
Yes.
way of thinking about language structures.
It stems back, of course, to the Mellon Renewal Project, which was a Southwark Council initiative to include artists in the regeneration of this area. And Latham's original and very ambitious plan for the front of Flat Time House was reduced to this wonderful book. And the univoice is still unheard, relates to an invoice that Latham had submitted, which Latham was always battling with the authorities in one way or another. His unpaid invoice, but also the fact that probably some of his ideas and his principles for life, in a way, for life and art, were also unheard.
Yes.
So this book is a magnificent statement. And as you can see, it passes through the glass of the window, and glass was a very important material for Latham, because it was his point zero, which is that point where time and space coexist, collide, and so on. So glass became the materialization of that theoretical point zero. So it's a very important thing, and the book moves through that plane, and in a way that's encapsulated in many of his other works, of course.
I think something I'd just like to say about the book too, and that idea of the point zero, is the fact that we've got the unheard and the implication of spoken and unspoken, and the notion of language and the voice, and the speaking onto the street and having the street coming through the mouth because of what they hear, and being drawn and compelled into this living sculpture is really important, and the way that resonates. And between that notion of the point zero and the mirror and the connectivity between the two, we have that sort of notion of the surface or the meniscus, the edge that holds things in balance. And we don't know which way it's going to go, this way or that way, inside or outside.
So I think that really does sum up how Latham operated, really, in that odd state of balance between the non-existent, in a way, the fact that we can never grasp a moment in time, and how we articulate that, or how an artist can articulate that, and how an artist can articulate it in a way that no one else can. Yeah. And so when he created this, and when he established this face, he was thinking in terms of the whole building, and particularly the ground floor, as a theoretical work, as a piece of sculpture. So what we're actually experiencing are works within a work. And so Latham designated each room within the building as a part of this sculpture. So the glass frontage is the face. And now we're here in the mind. Then we go through into the brain, beyond that to the body event, and then to the hand. So as we walk through the exhibition, we'll be walking through these different elements of the sculpture as well.
And the bodily sculpture.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we should talk about this amazing piece.
Yes.
It's so stunning to be with it in person rather than looking at it in reproduction.
This work here, of which there are 3 elements on show in the exhibition, 3 elements of 37 altogether, titled The N.U. Nidri Heart. And Latham, of course, used books as they're kind of bearers of knowledge, but they have a symbolic presence as well. And the 2 books that run through each piece, each element of this over much larger work, are the Pregnancy Survival Manual and Vanished Species. So he puts them together, and they represent both the ends of a spectrum of life. So
it's like the ends and the beginnings simultaneously.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
And the thing I really find very wonderful and simplistic but complicated as well is the juxtaposition between the glass and the sand.
Well, it's interesting because why is the sand there? Yeah. I'm not quite sure why the sand's there, but it kind of gives it this, I was going to say concrete base, but it gives this very material base. And it was quite interesting thinking of the N.U. Nidri Heart title and its relationship to the sand made me think of Latham's appropriation of the bings in Glasgow, the great slag heaps that are along by the side of the road that runs from Edinburgh to Glasgow, which Latham appropriated as works of art when he was working in that part of the world. So there's there's something about this sand that, for me at least, evokes the presence of that kind of material in those great mountains of slag.
Yeah, the slopes.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
And I think that what strikes me really particularly is about the use of the glass and the sand is the way the glass comes from the sand, but the sand is on the seashore, and this notion of vanished species, and also the kind of the fact of birth and the waters of the womb, and the kind of evolutionary process is like such a visual way of bringing those juxtapositions together. But we don't need to rationalise those thoughts. They can just.
Well, this is the thing about Latham, that most of us have difficulty grasping his theories. I think that's fair enough to say. But we get drawn into his work through the poetic association of materials and language. So we know something's going on here that's really fascinating, even if we don't quite know what it is. So we enter the poetic realm of Latham's imagination, and we have to kind of work our way through it to get to the core of it. And that's a very, very interesting and can be frustrating journey.
And it's a very interesting process because it's like we're being taken in through the mouth into the mind and the brain, and we're reckoning with what he's reckoning. But we're being given the liberty to do so without having a wrong or a right or a this is this, and a kind of interpretative responsibility.
I mean, it really does, follow the old Duchampian notion that as spectators or as an audience, we complete the cycle of work for each of us individually. So there are as many meanings to it as there are people who are looking at it, which is it's great. And although a lot of those meanings will be similar, we'll interpret it very likely in similar ways, but it's so open-ended. And then, of course, we've got the information behind the origination of this piece, behind the inspiration for this piece, which is the Mellon Renewal Scheme, which was the initiative from Southwark Council, the Southwark Council set up. They recognised that Peckham was changing. And they wanted Peckham to change. They wanted to regenerate this area. And they were canny enough to realise that artists play a crucial role in the regeneration process. And so they supported artists in order to kickstart that whole idea. And so the lampposts outside were designed by Tom Phillips, whose studio is just down the road. In fact, he shared the site with Anthony Gormley at that time. And Gormley designed and installed the street bollards, which have, they're still in the public eye even now, because they're still quite a controversial thing. They crop up now and again. Yeah. And I've heard stories that people came along with lifting equipment and nicked them off the corners. I don't know whether that's true or not. But
well, no, I mean, maybe it is.
But we've got, so Bellenden Road has the Gormleys, it's got Tom Phillips lighting and so on, and these various artists were supported in that way. But and this maquette on the wall here, of course, shows how John had originally planned the book piece, which was just a bit too ambitious. And so it's now represented with a painted image above the shop, and the sculpture actually goes through the window, as we've been discussing. Okay, well, we've moved from face and mind more deeply into Flat Time House, and we're now in the area that Latham called body event, which is, to all intents and purposes, the kitchen in this house, which still functions as a kitchen. And this was important to Latham because he wanted to maintain that practical use at the core of this sculpture. And this fits very well with the work that we're showing in here by Eva Kot'átková, and because she has the same intention. She had the same intention for this work, that it should be shown in just this kind of environment and just this kind of context. So it's worked out very well. And the thing about Eva's work is that she has consistently deals with the notion of anxiety, of personal anxiety, of human anxiety. And whereas when we were thinking about Rosenberg's idea that it's our difficulty in understanding the art objects that are presented to us, and that creates a sense of anxiety, we're now thinking that audiences have become so sophisticated that it's actually the anxiety that's within the artists themselves that comes to the fore.
Yeah, there's also, something which resonates very clearly through with the Latham in here, and this idea of the being positioned in a symbiotic in-betweenness of the fish and the fish costume and the being personified as a fish, and then with all this stuff that's cut from the inside of the fish or comes from within, and we're in the body part which is producing the food anyway. Exactly.
So I mean, there are two elements in this room really. One is the drawings that are on the kitchen table, and this kitchen table is still intended to be used. So if somebody came in here into this kitchen, which they will do, and made their breakfast or whatever, they would sit here at this table and eat their breakfast. And there is a display of drawings by Eva, beautiful drawings, aren't they? Yes. And this kind of symbolic arms of the person who will accompany whoever actually sits here in reality. So you'll never be alone if you're having your breakfast at this table, because there's this other person present. Yeah, exactly.
And also their presence across the table, so that you then have a conversation over your breakfast or whatever with the person and with the drawings and with the performance and the elements within.
So the fish is spilling out all these objects from its guts, and these are everyday objects from the life of an anxious person who is trying to maintain an equilibrium and a purpose and fulfill all the responsibilities of daily life, up against the pressures of having to go out to work, look after children, get the shopping in, all these things that put a strain on us. And this is the detritus from that daily round, the daily tasks, the daily drudgery, and the fish is spilling them out, because the fish in the text that Eva has written that goes with this piece, which is performed by a person actually becoming the fish and being within this helpless, captured person who's placed in the hands of students in a biology class and so on. And then these parallels are drawn between that and the plight of the individual trying to find their way through navigating stuff. Exactly. Yeah. Navigating stuff and navigating a very hazardous and unfriendly sea of one sort or another.
Which is always topsy-turvy and always changing and unpredictable.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as we leave the body event room, we see more references to the body, where Eva has constructed a whole series of sleeves, of arms, of organs, of bits of body, of bits of life. There's an aesthetic aspect to the work which draws us in. We don't at first really know what it is that we're looking at, which goes back to the whole idea of the anxious object, although we're canny enough these days to realise that what we're looking at has meaning as art. But we don't necessarily know quite what it is, so it draws us in through its aesthetic presence, and then we can unravel it. Well, what is it? Are we looking at entrails? Are we looking at limbs? Are we looking at...
different colours?
Exactly.
Beautiful colours?
Beautiful colours, yeah. Well, we've moved through the brain into body event. We've come out of body event into the corridor that links the brain with the hand. And along this corridor are Eva Kot'átková's sleeves that we just spoke about. But also in the background, there is the sound of John Cage's piece based on Finnegan's Wake, James Joyce's novel Finnegan's Wake, which underpins this exhibition as a whole. Cage's piece, Roratario. And at either end of the corridor are two works that relate to Cage. The one behind me here, the score, has been typed out on an old style typewriter. And it's the temporal account of Cage's work, 4 minutes, 33 seconds, which, as everybody knows really, is the work that David Tudor premiered, sitting at the piano, not touching the keys, but allowing the audience to become absorbed by and listen to the ambient sound in the hall, in the room, coming in from the street outside. And what Büchler has done here, he has typed out every second of the 4 minutes and 33 seconds. So he's given again a materiality and a temporality to the piece, the Cage's piece, that only exists in the ethers. And so the corridor then becomes a vehicle for Cage's ideas interpreted in concrete form by Büchler's concrete poem in a way.
Well, exactly. And the other thing about it is the way that he's using the typewriter, the old-fashioned typewriter. And then so instantly anyone who remembers those old-fashioned typewriters hears the sound associated with that punctuation of that notation.
Yes. Well, we've walked through the length of the Flat Time House sculpture, and we're now in the final room, the Hand, which Latham conceived as being that place in which had a more practical undertaking, a more practical purpose, where he would often spend his time and sitting and thinking and drawing and working.
And receiving people.
And receiving people. And on the wall here is the other piece by Pavel Büchler, which is entitled Beckett's Cage. And this piece consists of 3 elements, 2 of which are framed, and the third of which is the gap between the 2 framed pieces. And it comes from a work of Samuel Beckett's, a short work of Samuel Beckett's, entitled Imagination, Dead Imagine. And Beckett uses this phrase once or twice in the course of the text, a pause more or less long. And Büchler has made this text a concrete thing in its own right, but included an ephemeral, invisible, atmospheric pause within the work itself.
And that also suggests literally moving yourself, your body, from one work to another work.
Yes, yes.
And that swing between the first and the second.
Yes.
And that gap.
Yes.
And what we project into that gap.
Yes. And this is, again, an example of a poetic imagination at work within a concrete structure, if you like. And the title Beckett's Cage, of course, not only refers to Beckett, but also refers to cage. And the silence, and cage is silence, and 4 minutes 33, and so on. And we were talking the other day, weren't we, about these influential figures.
Yes.
Joyce, Finnegan's Wake, which is underpins this show as a whole, Beckett and Cage, and the effect that they've had on visual artists.
How they cast their shadows through that whole period of time.
Yes. And that can sometimes work and it can sometimes fail, because the presence of those great figures can seduce artists into trivializing them.
Exactly. And another thing I think which it brings us back to, and sort of in a very really rather wonderful way, is the title of the exhibition, Ants and Grasshoppers.
Yes.
And how that sort of sets a director for the experience of Finnegan's Wake, which we could say the experience of the works that are in this exhibition and Latham's work.
Yeah. Yes, well, of course, Finnegan's Wake influenced Latham very profoundly, and he made 2 pieces, Shem and Shaun, that relate directly to it, and the which deals with the kind of sort of endlessness of the text. And while we're discussing it, it's quite interesting. With Eva Kot'átková's work, the text that the performer reads is also endless. It's a circular thing, so it has no ending. You get to the end, you start again, just like Finnegan's Wake. But going back to the influence of these great figures, I think Büchler has really dealt with that very effectively. He's encapsulated those moments of cage, and he's juxtaposed them with this kind of absence, this pause in the Beckett text, which is a very complete statement which deals with something that's all you would think would be almost impossible to pin down, but he's managed to do it here, I think.
Yeah, and the way that really naturally it kind of slips in the idea of the parameter.
Yes.
And the parameter remains always somewhere, but isn't ever pinned down, because we got it caged.
Yes, yes.
but
Exactly.
uncaged.
Yes, yes, yeah, yes.
The positioning of this work of Sarah Lucas, Tit Cat, Eames chair, is utterly stunning. As soon as I came into this room, my first impulse, which I resisted, was to touch it.
Yes. It's a very, very tactile thing, and I had the same, I had to resist the same temptation. And I think if we think back to Latham's idea of this being the hand, where things are fabricated in a sense, the concrete, because the Eames chair, the classic Eames chair with the footstool, are made from cast concrete. So they're incredibly heavy and dense things. And the bronze sculpture, the sort of tits and bulls sculpture, sits as a cat might sit. You know, the cat would make itself at home on the chair, curl up and go to sleep. But this isn't curling up and going to sleep. This is some kind of grotesque manifestation that could almost, you know, jump out and
Suck us in.
yes, like some sort of alien objects and taking us over. So it has this tremendous presence that's both surreal and domestic and
And alluring and
alluring and anxiety making, I think. And so I think that Sarah Lucas's work fits theoretically, it fits as far as the overall idea of the show, it fits this domestic space, and it exudes this eerie concrete presence in a way that nothing else in this show does to the same extent, I think. And I like the contrast between this and behind us the work of Pavel Büchler that we were just talking about, A Pause More or Less Long, because the presence of this is partly made more dynamic by the space between these two objects, because you can't sit there and put your feet on there, it's too far. So the pause, the gap, the invisible moment that exists between these two things, in a way, is somewhat like the invisible pause or the moment that exists between those two things.
it's like they're all like wonderful pieces of magic. With these characters that remain alluring and draw us in again and again and again.
And each work, I think, you know, you can see them in a flash, in a moment. You can have that visceral experience. You can have that moment of excitement, but you can also spend time with them and unpick them and unravel them, come back to them, which I've been doing all week, coming back to them, seeing more things in them, different things about them, and thinking about their association, and also thinking about the way Latham's idea for the ground floor of this house and its different components, because that's so unusual and imaginative to think. So he created a theoretical world that he could inhabit, actually physically inhabit. So he was never away from that expression of his ideas in that world, which is really remarkable, I think. Yeah. Much more than just as an artist in their studio, but as an artist absolutely inseparable from the spirit of the work that they're involved with.
Inside and outside.
Inside and outside, which takes us right back to the beginning of this thing. Absolutely. And a book at the front of the house.
The book as the sort of mouth.
So everything's circular, just like Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah.